by welcoming to the Red Chamber, Dr. Buffy Sainte-Marie.
Thank you all so very much. Old friends, new friends, people who come from right here, people from far away, thank you so much. I thank the Creator for this day, when good people of good hearts come together because of music, because of education, because of government, and because we truly want to move our country forward and make the world better. I very happily acknowledge that we are on unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose families have lived on this territory for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. My thanks to Senator Mary Lou McPhedran for contacting me with this invitation to be with you today. I'm truly honored. Before anybody ever knew that I was a songwriter, I was a teacher with degrees in education and philosophy from the University of Massachusetts. And in 1964, I made my first album and was named Billboard magazine's Best New Artist. That was the year the Beatles came to North America. During the Kennedy years, I traveled throughout Europe and Australia, Asia and North America, and by 1968, I was a young singer with too much money. In my travels to reserves in Canada and the US, I met many, many Aboriginal students who didn't know how to negotiate the path from high school to college. So I started my Nihiwan Foundation for Native American Education. Nihiwan loosely means talk Cree, but what I meant was be your culture, wherever you come from. And I gave scholarships on both sides of the border. And my proudest moment wasn't the day that I received my Academy Award, but it was when I finally found out that 2 early scholarship recipients had gone on to found and become the presidents of tribal colleges, of the American Indian Tribal College Movement, and one of them founded the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. So my point is that sometimes you can do some little small thing that somebody else will take and maximize beyond your wildest dreams. So don't ever give up on that. In 1968, when I was invited to take a major role in a 2-hour movie for television called The Virginian, I insisted that all the Native American roles be played by Native American actors, and this had never been done before. The producer and the director, the director was Leo Penn, who was Sean Penn's father, and they said that it was impossible, but I insisted. I said, it's not only possible, but no Indians know Buffy. What they didn't know, see, and what I did know, was that right in their own town, right down the street, there was an Indian Actors Workshop that had been being run for several years by my friend Lois Red Elk from Montana and by Jay Silverheels, who comes from Six Nations Reserve not far from here. So all I did was something very similar. I connected the movie people with the professional Indian actors, and we made history then and there. And it was the first movie ever to have all Native American cast playing the Native American roles. It was easy, it made sense, and it was a matter of connecting the dots. And there are some more dots that I would like to see connected, and you might want to help with some of them. The first one, the travel industry. Because of exorbitant excess baggage charges for our instruments, the power of music can't get to Canada. Musicians can no longer afford to travel to the cities, let alone to remote areas of Canada where they need our music. It's not only affecting professional musicians, but it's also becoming impossible for high school and college bands to travel. Here's how bad it is. For an underweight guitar and a suitcase, I had an airline charge me $1,376, or they wouldn't let me on the plane. It seems like this is the time for the music industry to be working together with airlines, government, registered charities, media, and the travel industry to come up with a plan to make sure that live music can continue across Canada for years to come. Music is very important to young people, to middle people, to old people, to everybody. I brought all this up in my acceptance speech for the Alan Waters Humanitarian Award the other night, and I've already heard from several music industry executives who hadn't looked at the problem until now, and they say too that they would like to try and fix this. In Australia, musicians can now apply for a card that allows their instruments to fly at a discounted rate, and airlines flying within Australia have to honor that. I must say I was very grateful to receive the Alan Waters Humanitarian Award from Caris, who sponsored the Junos. I was very impressed the year before, too, when I heard the acceptance speech from Arcade Fire, who'd done so much wonderful work, especially in Haiti. And I just think that it's very good that an organization like Caris recognizes not only do recording artists and musicians do other things like visual art or dance or something, but that we also do things outside of our lives that often don't get recognized. And it's as though our musical careers can overshadow some of the good work that people in music are doing. Number 2, Canada 150. There's money out there, but philanthropists are not giving it to startups or to new ideas. I've had a foundation for over 50 years, and I know what it's like to rub elbows with the Rockefellers and the Fords. But today in Canada, I have found, by talking to several organizations, philanthropists are preferring corporate-style hierarchies that look like themselves. They have huge, expensive administrative overhead. Thus, the money doesn't get to the grassroots or solve the problems for which they're intended. It all gets eaten up in infrastructure. So I urge government to understand this and look beyond the usual recipients, and also to lend support to the work of local, territorial, provincial, Canada-wide, people-centered groups. Number 3, it has to be mentioned, Idle No More. I'm not gonna, yay, thank you, Senator Dick. Idle No More. Go to the website. I'm not going to list the things that they're doing, but please go to their website and look for Idle No More calls for change. The list is concise. It's like a one-pager, but it's right there, the things that need to be done. One of the interesting things that they're doing, you know, for like what? Pick a number, 30,000, 40,000 years, we're not quite sure. Aboriginal people have been able to survive the geography and the weather of Canada in traditional houses. And in the government houses in which they're trying to survive today, living on oil, they can't do it. We get big problems. Idle No More has an initiative called One House, Many Nations campaign that I'm going to support. And if I get to see you in a year from now, I'll tell you one that I have in mind too, which I call Green Indians. You know, when Bill C-45 came along, it really bothered me that the thing was so long. And it was written in lawyerese. And this might be none of my business, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that should be discouraged. I think that laws need to be written in the vernacular and understandable by any college graduate. Treaty 1 is 4 pages long, and anybody can understand it. This is something you guys might be able to do something about. It's a dream. We can make it come true. Number 4. Although we finally have a human rights museum in Winnipeg, I really feel that it still soft pedals the genocide that is basic to this country's birth. Do you guys know about the doctrine of discovery, also called the doctrine of domination? This thing was written by popes during the Inquisition in the 14 and 1500s. It decrees that if European explorers come upon inhabited lands where the people are not Christians, These indigenous people are to be killed or enslaved. It's there in black and white. And their lands forfeited to Europeans, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the English, the French. The explorers were mandated to do that. And if you study the history of indigenous slavery for the past 1,500 years, there's a new book called The Other Slavery. You've got to get it. You will find out that that kind of stuff written into the law still impacts us today. In human trafficking today, about 80%, are women and children from indigenous communities. In my opinion, the doctrine of discovery needs to be formally, loudly, and forever overturned to the dignity of us all. Also, in my opinion, the doctrine of discovery should be written in great big letters on some of those giant empty walls in the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, so that people can understand how genocide is mandated. Slavery and human trafficking, it's a racket. It didn't just happen. There were investors, there were bankers, there were government, there were military. People were investing in it worldwide. We ought to know that. The Human Rights Museum should be telling us that, so that people can understand how it was institutionalized and how it affects indigenous people today. In that museum, where are the cattle prods that were used on indigenous children? It happened. You see people in the streets of Canada today who come from an indigenous background. They didn't have any parents. They had troubles. The museum shows photos of open graves found in Nazi Germany, so it's not as though we're afraid to tell the truth about how cruel human beings can be toward one another, especially toward minorities. In my opinion, when you walk into that museum, you ought to see that St. Anne's Residential School electric chair where children were tortured. Not just a few, a lot. We have to have courage. We have to be able to address it and admit it and heal it. And regarding facts that are just too tough for young children to handle, we need to have an adults-only room that tells what happened. There's a documentary available in the US now called The Doctrine of Discovery, Unmasking the Domination Code. And I'd like some encouragement and support for repurposing this information in a new documentary suited to Canada. For me, it's another way to address truth and reconciliation, another tool, and I'd like to do it. Number 5, my happiest reason for being here, to tell you about something I call Cradleboard Canada. In 1975, I joined the cast of Sesame Street. This was an opportunity to reach little kids and their caregivers with some of the same messages I had hoped to give my own generation until what media calls the blacklist years. Sesame Street was reaching people 3 times a day in 72 countries of the world, and I was there for 5 years. After I left in the 1980s, when my son was in grade school in Hawaii, his teacher came to me looking for teaching materials about Native American people, which she was required to teach. And she looked at her material and she thought they were baloney. And she was right, they were. It was the same old junk they had tried to put on me when I was a kid. What was available then was so narrow and shallow, it was worse than useless. As a teacher, even recently, I've been much concerned that what's often presented in schools as Native curriculum, medicine wheels, beads and feathers, etc., while it's not inaccurate, it's never seemed enough. And it's almost always been treated by schools as a nice extra, a nice to have, like an after-school project, not really to be taken seriously. Teacher time, I know as a teacher, is precious. And core subjects take priority. If your background is not in education, core subjects are the subjects that most educators agree everybody needs to learn, like science and government, geography, that kind of stuff. So in the 1980s, I began to write a new curriculum based in core subjects like science, government, geography. But whatever I wrote felt like dead text about dead Indians. And I wanted to give the students living realities, like what I found among real people in real homes and real Native communities, because I knew it was good. So I twinned Island School in Hawaii with a school at Star Blanket Reserve, where my cousin was working. And the two groups got to know each other. We started with a grade 5 class. They sent each other goodie boxes, and they communicated via letters and phone calls, faxes, and the fledgling internet to study my new curriculum material together as partners. Plus, I put the First Nations school into the driver's seat of delivering whatever it is they wanted to share with their partner. It might be about sports, it might be about food, it might be about their families, it might be about things that they love to do, it might be about their history. It was always up to them. And thus the Cradleboard Teaching Project became the major initiative of my Nahiwan Foundation for American Indian Education. In other words, I connected the dots. This was new. We developed core curriculum presented through Aboriginal cultural perspectives. And we did it through multimedia. As a songwriter with a history of effective 3-minute songs and television experience in delivering to short attention spans, I wrote the new core curriculum lessons as brief, hands-on, interactive multimedia and delivered it through a CD-ROM. One of the most valuable features of the Cradleboard Teaching Project was our way of reinforcing lessons with this multisensory interactive method of delivery, and I'll describe it for you. For instance, when studying the science of sound, the lessons about frequency and amplitude, did you ever try to study that in the book? You can't remember which is which, and it's just pictures? Well, the way I did it was to involve interactive sliders like we use in a recording studio. So the student herself is using her hands, her eyes, and her ears to see and hear the sound waves change shape via animation under her own direction. So that as she's operating the sliders and she's doing amplitude, she sees it's getting louder and softer and louder and softer and louder and softer. And when she comes to frequency and she's operating the sliders, she's seeing that it's not getting louder and softer, but the pitch is changing. And woo, woo, it's going up and down. This was true multisensory learning. Science, geography, etc. have no ethnicity. Science, government, geography, it all came from the Greeks. No. No. Anybody who has survived has known about geography, has known about government. There are many ways that the people take care of one another. Has known about science. Oh, no. The Mayans, acoustics, astronomy, optics, agriculture. Everyone who has survived has had these things. So why not reinforce the lessons with a study of indigenous musical instruments like flutes and drums and rattles and stringed instruments? We don't teach the kids how to play the instruments. We teach them the science behind why the flute changes pitch when you uncover the holes. You're lengthening and shortening the column of air. Ooh. Or why the drum changes pitch when it's heated by a light or a fire. Finally, the students are rewarded, after their tests, with an Aboriginal jukebox of both contemporary and traditional songs at their command. There's interactive testing with immediate feedback throughout the curriculum. Now, all this is just background. Last Wednesday, I visited Senator Maury Sinclair and Senator Mary Lou McPhedran in her office, and afterwards I got to sit in on the Aboriginal Committee meeting, which was chaired by Senator Dick. We all listened to testimonies from Doris Young of Opaskwayak Cree Nation in Manitoba and John Morrisseau, former president of the Manitoba Métis Federation. in Crane River. Their testimonies, especially regarding the impact of loss of language and loss of land, was heartbreaking, but it was also informative. And so I'm glad to say were the questions and comments from your senators. And I was encouraged that they seemed genuinely interested and willing to learn from the survivors. Regarding the loss of Indigenous languages, a language isn't just a bunch of different words for the same thing. If you think of the Romance language, you think of like Italian and French and Spanish, Portuguese. These are kind of like fingers. They have a lot in common. But an Indigenous language from another part of the world is like a thumb. It has a different function. It operates differently from within the brain and is stored differently in the brain. We need to preserve and vitalize them all. And we can do it, I think, through some of the methods we used in the Cradleboard teaching project I'm just telling you about. Whether or not we're able ever to fully launch Cradleboard Canada in my lifetime, I'd like to pass along some recommendations based in my years of operating our programs, mostly in the US, where we secured our initial funding. Although we were mandated to serve American students first by the foundations who gave us our startup money, you know me, I managed to include a whole lot of Canadian content. In order to teach science or any other subject in a local Indigenous language, we simply replace the audio track of the multimedia lesson with any local language or dialect of the community being served. It's easy. You don't have to rewrite the book. We use real community people, not actor voices. We provide local teacher colleges with the digital shells of the science lesson. And the teacher education department works with their multimedia department to replace the English soundtrack with local dialect speakers. It makes for quite lovely and lively lessons. It involves local communities, and it's fun and a very real option for both non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal learners. And you can do it. You can learn it in your language or your language or your language. You can replace the English soundtrack with French or Cree or Yupik or Chinese or any language. It's easy. The information stays the same, and it's so easy to replace the soundtrack when you do it through multimedia. All you need to do is just press the button for the language that you've chosen to include. Cradleboard methods are cost-effective, replicable, sustainable, deliverable online, and adaptable to local standards. I won't tire you with the full list of our curriculum offerings, but I surely would like your consideration of Cradleboard methods to help revitalize Indigenous languages in Canada through our use of core subjects through Aboriginal cultural perspectives. I'd really love to see a think tank here to discuss how and if the Cradleboard teaching project could work. If any of you are interested in learning more, I've provided information about our teacher training initiative to Senator McFedrin, and she has kindly offered to pass the information along. By the way, kind of off the track, but I just got to say, recently I read a paper written by Jody Wilson-Raybould, and wow, talk about impressive. We've got some stuff going on in Canada right now. You guys are part of it. We're so proud of you, and I'm so proud to be with you today and grateful for the honor you've extended to me. To your kindness, I say thank you, and thank you for the values that are supported by this present and I hope long-lasting administration. With that, I say, Kichi Miigwech, my friends, Kichi Miigwech, wherever you come from. I appreciate your attention, your time, and your honoring. Thank you so much.